When I tell this story now, I make it a punchline. I talk about karma, about cosmic justice. I frame the moment my car died on that empty highway as the universe getting a good laugh at my expense. In reality, what happened that night in the Nevada desert is the reason I don't like driving alone after dark anymore. It's the most harrowing experience of my life, and there's a part of it, the most important part, that I never tell anyone. Until now. It was 2014. I was an 18-year-old high school senior who thought he was invincible. My older brother was at college in California, and since our spring breaks lined up, I decided to drive out and visit him. There was just one problem. My license had been suspended for 30 days, a stupid mistake involving me, my friends, and a few beers a week prior. But I wasn't going to let that stop me. I left late in the day, armed with a six-pack of energy drinks and committed to the back roads. It added hours to the trip, but it meant avoiding the highway patrol. By midnight, I was in the gut of the Nevada desert. I was on a stretch of asphalt so empty they call it the loneliest road in America. And it lived up to the name. Nothing but sagebrush and faded, weather-beaten signs. I was so lost in thought about how utterly isolated I was that I almost missed the single orange traffic cone in the road, placed perfectly square on the yellow center line. I slowed down but didn't stop. I knew there was no road work. It was just junk, but the placement felt intentional, weird. A few miles later, another oddity appeared in the reach of my high beams. Something else was in my lane, taller than a cone, but not quite the right shape. I squinted, my heart starting to thud. That can't be a person. Lo and behold, it was. I swerved into the other lane, but the man in the road mirrored my car, stepping in front of me. He threw an arm out as if welcoming the impact. I slammed on the brakes, my car screeching to a halt just feet from him. My initial anger quickly curdled into fear as I got a better look. He seemed normal enough, middle-aged in jeans and a long tan coat, but his face was off. His blue eyes seemed too small, like beads pushed into a lump of clay. And he was grinning, a wide, predatory grin that showed too many teeth. That's when I saw what he was holding. Balled up in his fist was something small, furry, and slick with blood. My brain registered it as a dead rabbit or a rat. It didn't matter. It was wrong. His other hand was held behind his back. I took my foot off the brake. I might have been dumb enough to stop, but I wasn't staying. As I gunned the engine to swerve around him, he took a step back, letting his arms fall to his sides. I saw what he'd been concealing, a large, heavy claw hammer. I sped off, my breath catching in my throat. I glanced in my rearview mirror. Before the darkness swallowed him completely, I saw the man break into a run, chasing my car. The sight was so absurd I actually laughed. "Fucking idiot," I said to myself. And here's the punchline. No sooner had the words left my mouth than my car jolted with a sickening thud. There came a series of pops, loud as gunshots. Pop, 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 pop! My dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree as the steering wheel was ripped from my hands. The car dragged hard to the left, the low, flapping sound of shredded rubber filling the air. I wrestled the car to a stop and threw the door open. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness. All four tires were obliterated. 50 yards back, I saw it. A spike strip laid expertly across the road. I was being hunted. The man with the hammer was coming. I'd put maybe half a mile between us. That gave me 5 minutes, tops. My phone, of course, had no signal. My first instinct was to lock myself in the car, but what good is glass against a claw hammer? My only real option was to run. I was a cross-country runner. I had endurance. I grabbed my wallet, keys, and flashlight and took one last look back. He was cresting the small hill behind me. The low light and the bend in the road gave his long, loping strides an unnatural quality. He seemed to float over the asphalt. I turned and ran. I settled into a steady pace, glancing back every minute. His silhouette against the starry sky was a small, dark shape, but it was growing. He was gaining on me. 10 minutes passed. He wasn't tiring. He was just getting closer. Then headlights. A pickup truck was ambling toward me. Salvation. I ran into the middle of the road, waving my arms, screaming for help. The truck slowed and then eased around me. It just kept going. The driver didn't even look. My hope vanished with its shrinking red taillights. I stood there for a second in disbelief before forcing my legs to move again. I looked back and strangely, he was gone. Had he given up? Had I imagined it? I kept running. Half a mile later, I saw it. A car parked on the side of the road, a red Dodge Charger. Dark, silent. I crept closer, my light shaking. The tires were fine. There was no damage. The keys were still in the ignition. This is usually where I end the story. A miracle car. A narrow escape. I jumped in, turned the key, and the engine roared to life. As I slammed my foot on the gas, I looked out the passenger window and my heart stopped. He was there, yards away, closing the distance at an impossible speed. He hadn't given up. He'd cut through the open desert to flank me. His fingers were inches from the door handle as the Charger tore away, leaving him a pale, grinning blur in my mirror. I drove straight to the next town's police station. When they took me back at dawn to get my car, every single window had been shattered. Nothing was stolen. They never found the man. But here's the part I leave out, the real ending. When I first reached that Charger, the driver's side door was hanging open. I swept my flashlight inside. The cabin was a wreck. Blood was smeared over the steering wheel and seat. The windshield was cracked from the inside. A dark trail led from the open door into the weeds. I followed it with my light until the beam landed on a man lying on his back. Some poor soul who probably did give the traveler a ride. His mouth was open in a silent scream. His skull had been caved in, leaving a hollowed-out crater. My light fell back to the bloody driver's seat, then to the image of the hitchhiker's hand holding that small, furry, bloody clump, and I finally understood. That thing in his hand wasn't roadkill. It was a whole goddamn scalp. I can't remember my mother ever being sane. From the moment I was born, it felt like the house I grew up in was filled with her particular brand of madness. The air itself was thick with it. She always smelled of cheap whiskey, from early morning until late at night when her quiet sobbing would finally stop. I never saw my father, and whenever I summoned the courage to ask about him, she would look at me with this unnerving certainty, her eyes wide yet completely empty, and tell me that my father was an angel. Not in the sense of being a good man, literally, a real honest-to-God angel. A cigarette would dangle from her cracked lips as she'd repeat it, her voice a low, gravelly mantra. Your father is an angel, Daniel. A real angel. When I was 5, I believed her. I was proud. I ran to tell my friends at school who my father was. The reaction was predictable. I was mocked, teased, and bullied for years. No matter how many times my mother repeated her story, no matter how many televangelists she forced me to watch, I stopped believing. In my teenage years, our relationship became toxic. I was hot-tempered, and I openly called her crazy, begging her to just tell me the truth about my father. Who was he? Was he a deadbeat? A criminal? Anything was better than her insane fantasy. But instead, during one of her drunken episodes, she'd just scream it at me, clutching a cracked rosary in her hand as if she could summon him right there from the heavens. He burned with holy light when he came to me, she would shriek, grabbing my face, her long nails scratching my cheeks. And you carry his sacred blood? Eventually, I stopped listening to her. I stopped speaking to her at all. The day I turned 18, I moved to another city and fulfilled my lifelong dream, to escape that rotting house with its perpetually yellowed lighting and peeling water-stained walls, to escape my deranged mother. I got a job, made new friends, real good friends. Whenever they asked about my family, I told them I was an orphan. It was easier. I even started drinking a little myself, not to become her, but just to try and understand the fog she lived in. It's important to note that I was a firm atheist, a direct reaction to her suffocating, fanatical religiosity. But I'm not here to tell you how I ran away from home and my insane mother. I'm here to tell you how I came back. After I moved out, I always had this feeling that something was watching me. I chalked it up to stress, the lingering trauma of my childhood. I even saw a therapist, but that strange feeling of being protected, of being observed, never left. Once a car sped through a red light and nearly hit me, but I managed to leap out of the way just in time as if pushed by an unseen hand. Another time I just stopped walking for no reason, and a second later, a massive branch crashed down from a tree right where I would have been. It would have crushed my skull. Then, one night she left me 11 voicemail messages. Most were just her usual drunken sobs and slurred mumbling. But the last message, sent half an hour after the others, made my skin crawl. My mother's voice was a low, terrified whisper, as if she were hiding somewhere. He's coming for you, Daniel. Your father, he came for you. I stared at my phone, frozen. I hadn't spoken to her in almost 2 years. The next morning, I got a call from a local hospital. They said my mother had been admitted to the psychiatric ward. I barely held back a laugh. Not because it was funny, it wasn't, but because it was so completely horribly inevitable. The nurse on the phone sounded disturbed. We need you to come and collect her things from the house, she said. The police, they found something strange. Reluctantly, I drove back. The house was just as I remembered it, still reeking of damp wood, stale cigarettes, and despair. Her belongings were packed into a clear plastic bin. Old photographs of her when she was young and beautiful, her smile so sincere it hurt to look at. Among her things, 2 items stood out. A large, worn, leather-bound journal and a single massive black feather, thick and oily, unlike any bird I'd ever seen. The walls of her bedroom were covered with bizarre, complex symbols, drawn in what looked like chalk and ash. But the most striking thing of all was a huge figure drawn on the wall behind her bed, a figure with massive wings and outstretched arms, apparently drawn in her own blood. The nurse told me it had all been hidden behind furniture and old posters. My mother had been living in a secret shrine. That night, I tried to sleep in my old bed. I woke up freezing, the window wide open, though I clearly remembered locking it. There were deep, 3-fingered claw marks gouged into the wooden windowsill. Everything inside me clenched, and for the first time in my life I began to truly, seriously consider my mother's words. I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing scratching noises from the guest room. It wasn't rats. The sound was rhythmic and deliberate, like someone was methodically carving something into the floorboards. I knew the answers I needed were in her journal. When I picked it up, The old leather felt like it burned my hands, and yet I opened it and started reading. It began innocently enough. Notes about my birth, how she cried the first time she saw me, how my eyes reminded her of his. She never once wrote his name. Then things got much, much stranger. Tucked between desperate love letters to my father were praises of his divine, terrifying beauty, and detailed descriptions of horrifying rituals. Rituals on how to summon angels. He came to me again. He said he would take our son soon, despite promising before that he wouldn't. He says he loves only me and that I should ascend with him, be at his side. The neighbors saw him. They heard him moving in the attic at night. No one talks to me anymore. They look at me with fear. They know who fathered my child. He said the time has come for our son. How could he do this? He promised me. He promised I would go in our son's place. The very last entry was scrawled in a panicked, almost illegible hand. I won't let him take our son. I'll do whatever it takes to stop him. I slammed the journal shut, fighting back a wave of nausea. My hands were trembling. I dropped everything and ran from the house, driving aimlessly until the sun came up. That night, I dreamed of wings. Not the soft, white wings from Sunday school books, but huge and broken, their tips like charred coal and their roots a strange, shimmering gold. A distorted, wrong voice, a voice that was both beautiful and monstrous, repeated my name over and over. Daniel. I woke up to the sound of feathers sliding across my apartment floor, but when I turned on the light, there was nothing there. Only a strange smell, like freshly cut grass and burning meat. The dreams continued, each time with more detail. Not just wings now, but a tall, gaunt figure with those same outstretched arms. It was always still, watching me from the shadows. Its eyes glowed in the dark, and its voice said my name like it owned me. Things started happening in my apartment. The lights would flicker and die, objects would move on their own, deep three-fingered claw marks appeared on my walls, the TV would turn on to static in the middle of the night. I didn't know where to go or what to do. In desperation, I went to a church. The old priest sat on a bench by the altar, bent over a prayer book. The moment I entered, he tensed, as if sensing a darkness I had brought in with me. "What brings you here, my son?" he asked, his voice kind. "I need an answer," I stammered. "I need to know what to do, if my father is an angel." The priest flinched as if I'd struck him. He slowly closed the prayer book and stood, his old knees cracking. He stared at me with an intensity that seemed to peel back the layers of my soul. "Who told you that?" he whispered. "My mother. He's been coming to me in dreams. I feel him watching me through mirrors. Wherever I go, I feel his gaze. I feel something changing inside me. I'm so scared, Father." He placed his hands on my shoulders. His skin was as cold as a gravestone. "The beings you describe are not the messengers of love we speak of here," he said, his voice trembling. "They are ancient, primordial, more terrifying. Some of them were rejected by God himself, and if one of them is your father—" He didn't finish. He just stepped back and crossed himself, his eyes wide with fear. "You must reject him, renounce him, and never, ever accept him. Don't look into his face if he appears. Such beings want to continue their lineage through humanity. If you accept him, you will never be human again." In that moment, a cold, alien thought stirred deep inside me. Maybe I was never human to begin with. The dreams became reality. I would blink, and for a split second, I'd see black feathers floating in the air. I'd turn suddenly and see his face behind a curtain, wide, frozen, unblinking eyes staring at me before vanishing. Then I got the call. My mother had died of cardiac arrest. The moment the nurse said the words, a sharp, overwhelming mix of smells hit me: burned feathers, scorched meat, cinnamon, sulfur, and cut grass. He had been there. Then I heard my mother's voice in my head. She sounded like she was laughing and crying at the same time. "Daniel, my beloved son, he's so proud of you. Your father finally took me with him. Don't be afraid, son. He'll take you too, and we'll finally be a family again. Accept it. We love you." I vomited, paralyzed by a terror so profound it felt like my soul was trying to escape my body. I tried to flee my apartment, but the TV switched on. The screen flickered, then dissolved into a chaotic swarm of white noise. The static became rhythmic, like breathing. Then a silhouette emerged from the blur. An outline, then wings, huge and broken, just like in my dreams. Its head was tilted, its face obscured by a distorted holy light. It moved. It was coming closer, pushing through the screen, the lines of static warping around it as if it were tearing through the fabric of reality itself. Then through the crackle of static, a distorted, inhuman voice echoed through the room. "You are ready." The screen convulsed, and from its center a hand emerged. Long clawed fingers that shimmered with both blinding light and utter darkness. The hand reached for me. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. I was frozen as he fully emerged, a nightmare being born into my living room. He only vaguely resembled a man. His face was a twisted, terrifying, ancient version of my own. He was impossibly tall and thin, wrapped in wings that shimmered like black metal. His voice sounded like wind blowing across a million graves. "We are one family again, Daniel." I blacked out. I woke up on my bathroom floor in a pool of my own blood. I coughed, spitting more of it up, and I could feel something pulsing under my skin, rearranging me from the inside out. I looked in the mirror and my eyes were no longer my own. They were his. Hours later, an excruciating pain erupted in my back, like something was trying to tear its way out. All food began to taste like ash. My tongue would burn and regrow in seconds if I even thought of a prayer. I no longer need sleep. My back has slowly torn open as the black bony stubs of wings have burst through the flesh. He came to me yesterday, not in a dream. He stood in my room and showed me visions of burning skies and oceans of wings, of a throne made of a billion watching eyes. His voice was a choir of thousands, all speaking as one. He said he will teach me to walk between the dimensions of the world once my wings are fully grown. He says they will break free completely within 2 days. My skin now peels away in flakes like ash, and my teeth fall out, only to be immediately replaced by sharper ones. I no longer feel pain. The fear is gone. It vanished when I felt the very air bend to my will. I have accepted it. I see them now, other angels like my father. They stand in the corners of my vision, welcoming me into their ranks. My mother stands among them, her face streaked with tears of joy. As I type this, I can see the future. I see myself shining with a dark, holy light just like my father. I see myself standing in a storm of holy fire, and soon I will continue the bloodline. Amen. Let me tell you something about true fear. It's not about the jump scares you see in movies. It's not the monster jumping out of the closet. True fear is a slow burn. It's a creeping dread that settles in your bones and tells you that the world is not the safe, predictable place you thought it was. It's the horrifying realization that you are nothing more than a pawn in a game you never even knew you were playing. I learned this lesson 13 years ago. My best friend, Caleb Ashworth, invited me to sleep over at his house for the very first time. After a decade of friendship, I was finally going to see where he lived. If I had known what was waiting for me inside the walls of Greywood House, I would have run and never looked back, but I didn't. And that night broke something inside of me, something that never healed. This is the story of that night. The screen fades to black, then fades in on a flashback. We had been friends for 13 years, an eternity in the life of a teenager, and in all those years I had not once slept at his house. Not for a birthday, not for a project, not once. Our sleepovers were always at my place, a fact that had become a running joke between us. So when he called me that Friday, his voice tight with a strange energy, the question was inevitable. "So why the sudden invite?" I asked, hoisting my duffel bag higher on my shoulder as I stood on his front porch. Caleb held the heavy oak door open, a gesture that seemed to require all his strength. "My parents are going out," he said, and the words came out of him in a breathless rush, as if he'd been holding them in for a long time. "Figured it's about time you saw my humble abode." The house was not a humble abode. It was Greywood House, a local landmark, a cancerous growth of gray wood and darkened stone that seemed to loom over the manicured lawns of the newer suburban homes around it. It stood on the land as if it had been there forever, and the town had begrudgingly grown around its ancient, gnarled roots. Skeletal oak trees, their limbs twisted like arthritic fingers, stood guard over the grounds, casting long, menacing shadows across the yard, even in the late afternoon sun. The moment I stepped inside, the air changed. It became thick, heavy, and cold. There was a smell of old, polished wood and drying lavender, but something else lingered beneath it, a subterranean odor, like freshly turned earth after a hard rain, the cloying sweetness of rot buried deep beneath the floorboards. His mother, Mrs. Ashworth, was a woman built of small, delicate bones, and she carried a frantic, brittle smile that did not, for a single second, touch her hollow, dark eyes. She moved about the dim rooms with the nervous, jerky energy of a trapped bird, fluttering from one piece of antique furniture to another, asking if I needed a drink, a snack, a place to sit. Her voice was a high, thin whisper. His father sat in a massive, cracked leather armchair in the corner of the living room, and he did not speak. He was a large, imposing man whose eyes were dark and still as a deep well. They followed Caleb and me as we passed, a silent, unnerving weight. I felt like a bug under a magnifying glass. As we headed for the stairs, I heard his mother whisper words to Caleb, her voice urgent and low, sharp as a needle. "You remember what you have to do, Caleb. You remember the rules." I couldn't make out his reply, only a quiet, defeated mumble. At precisely 7 o'clock, the Ashworths left. Mrs. Ashworth gave me one last, fleeting look, her smile so tight I thought her face might crack. Mr. Ashworth simply walked out the door without a word. The sound of their car pulling away was swallowed by the oppressive silence of the house. "So, what's the plan?" I asked, trying to break the heavy tension. I dropped my bag on the floor of Caleb's room. The room was a small, shocking island of the ordinary in that mausoleum of a house. Faded band posters were taped to the walls, clothes were strewn over a chair, and a game console was hooked up to a small television. It was the only place in the entire house that did not feel as if it belonged to the long dead. "Pizza, video games, the usual," Caleb said. He knelt and woke the machine from its slumber. He moved with a forced, deliberate calm, but I could see the tendons standing out in his neck like cords, a clear betrayal of his inner turmoil. We ate the greasy pizza and mashed the buttons on our controllers, and for a time, I almost managed to forget. For a time, I did not think of the strange, silent house, or of the suffocating quiet that lay coiled in its other rooms like a sleeping serpent. For a time, it was only the two of us and the digital symphony of explosions and gunfire from the screen. It was normal. It was safe. Then, as the time neared 9, he paused the game. The sudden silence was jarring. "Hey, man," he said. He wouldn't look at me, his eyes fixed on the controller in his hands, his thumbs rubbing nervously over the plastic. "There's just one weird rule my parents have." "Weird rule?" I asked, a half smile on my face. "Yeah." He finally raised his head, and his eyes were as serious and as cold as stone. The casual friend I knew was gone, replaced by a grim-faced warden. "After 9 p.m., we have to be in here, in the bedroom, and we can't leave. Not for anything, not for the bathroom, not for a drink, nothing. The door stays closed until sunrise." I stared at his face, searching for the punchline, for the jest that was not there. "You're kidding, right? What if I have to pee?" "Pee now," he said. His voice was completely flat, devoid of any emotion. He gestured with his chin to an empty 2-liter soda bottle on his desk. "And after 9, you use that." The laugh I had forming in my throat died there, choking me. "Dude, that's insane. Why? What's the big deal?" He shrugged his shoulders, but the motion was stiff, counterfeit, a puppet's gesture. "They're just super weird about security. Old house, you know? They think it's drafty." Drafty. The lie was so thin it was transparent. I knew he was lying, I just didn't know why. At that moment, as if on cue, the grandfather clock in the downstairs hall began to chime the hour. Its deep, resonant tolls echoed through the house, each one a hammer blow against the silence. Bong, bong, bong! Caleb's head snapped toward the door, his eyes wide with panic. Bong, bong, bong! He was on his feet before the 9th bell had even finished sounding its final mournful note. He crossed the room in 3 quick strides and slammed the heavy door shut. He then reached down and slid a massive, industrial-looking bolt of solid steel into its housing. The sound it made was deafening in the quiet room, a sound of grim finality. "Chunk thump." "There," he said. A single word breathed out on a shaky exhale. A sheen of sweat had bloomed on his brow. "We're good." "Caleb, what the hell is going on?" I demanded, my own fear starting to bubble up into my throat. "Nothing, man. Just a weird rule," he said, his back still to me. He wouldn't look at the door. He turned and snatched up his controller, cranking the volume on the game until it was a roaring cacophony in the small room, a desperate attempt to drown out the silence. But I did not see the game. I saw only the bolted door, and I felt a coldness take root in the pit of my stomach. The house was quiet again, but it was not the same quiet as before. This was a listening quiet, a waiting quiet. And in the dark, beating heart of that ancient house, something waited, and we were locked in that room, waiting with it. An hour passed in a tense, buzzing silence broken only by the noise of the game. The immediate fear went out of Caleb slowly, like air from a punctured tire, and he played with a feigned calm that didn't sit right on him. We played on, and a deep vexation grew in me at the sheer foolishness of it all. It was just a house. "You really need to tell your parents this is a certifiable way to raise a serial killer," I said, trying to make a joke of it. He gave back a weak, fake smile. "Tell me about it." Then came a sound from the rooms below. It wasn't loud, but in the pregnant silence it was a gunshot. It was a soft and measured thumping on the wooden floorboards of the main hall. Thump, thump, thump. "What's that?" I whispered, my eyes darting toward the door. Caleb played on. He stared at the screen with laser focus, his fingers working the buttons as if he did not hear a thing. "It's nothing. House settling." "That's not the house settling, Caleb," I said, my voice barely a breath. The thumping had a rhythm, a purpose. The sound ceased. In the ringing quiet that followed, I could hear the frantic pounding of my own blood in my ears. Then there came a new sound, a sound that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. It was a dragging sound, a scraping of some great, awful weight across the wood floor beneath us, like a heavy piece of furniture with broken feet being pulled across the room. I reached over and muted the television. The sudden silence was absolute. "Okay, that's definitely not the house," I said, my voice trembling. Caleb set his controller down gently upon the carpet. His face was a pale, waxy mask in the shifting, colorful light of the muted screen. "Just ignore it, Noah, please. It goes away if you ignore it." "What? What is it? What goes away?" Before he could answer, it spoke. The voice came from the hallway, faint at first, a sweet melody on the other side of our door. "Caleb? Honey?" I froze. I did not move. I barely breathed. The voice was his mother's voice. "Caleb, sweetheart, your father and I came home early. I brought you boys some warm cookies. Open the door." I looked to Caleb and saw a boy who looked as if he'd been cast in tallow, all the blood drained from his face. He stared at the door as if it were the gate of hell itself, and he slowly raised a single trembling finger to his lips and shook his head, a desperate, silent plea. "Caleb, that's your mom," I whispered, my own mind struggling to process the situation. "Don't be silly, sweetie, we're inside," the voice said. It was closer now, just outside the door. Its tone was full of sweet persuasion. "I just baked your favorites. Chocolate chip, they're getting cold." The awful scraping from below had stopped. There was only the cloying, sweet persuasion of that voice in the silent house. But the voice was wrong. There was a terrible, uncanny perfection in its sound, like a digital recording of a voice, a memory of a voice, and not the voice itself. Then came the knocking. It was not a normal knock. It was a soft and wet sound on the far side of the door, as if a raw piece of meat were being rhythmically struck against the wood. Thump, thump, thump. "Caleb? Noah? Are you boys all right in there? You're being awfully quiet." "Caleb," I mouthed, but no sound came from my throat. He sat upon the floor like a man made of stone, his eyes wide with a plea that had no words. He looked like an animal caught in a trap. The brass knob of the door began to turn, once to the left and once to the right. Then it began to rattle in its fitting with a growing, frantic violence. "Boys, this isn't funny," the voice said. The sweetness in it broke then, shattering like glass, and it was replaced with a hard and ragged edge that scraped along my nerves. "Open the door!" A great deafening blow struck the door, and the entire frame groaned in the wall. I scrambled away from it on my hands and feet, my breath coming in ragged gasps, until my back was pressed hard against the far wall of the room. The voice changed again. It spoke, and the voice was a ruin, a low and guttural thing that gurgled deep in its throat, a sound dredged up from a wet grave. "I know you're in there!" The wet tapping began again, faster now, frantic and desperate. With it came a thin and keening whine, a high-pitched sound like wind screaming through a crack in the world, and from the dark gap beneath the door, a black and viscous fluid began to seep into the room. It was thick as crude oil, and it carried the smell of the grave, of wet soil, and of things that rot and decay in the cold, dark earth. Caleb moved. He didn't run. He moved with the slow, defeated shuffle of someone who had lost this fight 100 times before. He crawled to the bed and pulled the blankets over his head, becoming a small and shuddering shape in the dim room. He had gone into his own darkness, a fortress of cotton and down, and left me alone in mine. On the other side of the door, the thing fell silent. I knew it was not gone. I knew that in my bones. It was there, in the darkness beyond the door, and it was listening. It was waiting. I kept my back plastered to the far wall, and I watched the door, my breath a small, panicked thing in my throat. For me, this was a single night's terrifying journey into darkness. For Caleb, I was beginning to realize this was just the place he lived. A fool's curiosity, a trait which has been my ruin more than once, began to war with the stark terror. A primal need to see the shape of the thing that hunted us, to give form to my fear, began to overwhelm me. A dreadful truth was better than the suffocating torture of not knowing. I pushed myself off the wall and went forward on my stockinged feet, the old boards blessedly silent beneath my weight. "Noah, no!" came a muffled voice from the bed. Don't look." But I would look. I had to. I knelt upon the floor, the reek of the grave stronger now, stinging my nostrils. I lowered my head to the cold brass of the keyhole and peered through. At first there was only the dim, cavernous hall and the pale, sterile moonlight that fell in a single sharp blade from the tall window at its end. Then, something stepped into the narrow, distorted view. It was not a man, nor was it a beast. It was a thing that seemed to be built of sticks and of shadow, impossibly tall and disturbingly thin. Its limbs were the long, gnarled limbs of a dead winter tree, and its body was a swirling gyre of dust and night that had no true, solid form. It wore his mother's floral apron, the cloth stretched taut over a hollow space where a chest should be. It wore his father's tweed hunting cap, set at a jaunty angle upon a head that was only a clot of writhing, moving dark. It had no face, only a deep, lightless void. In one of its long, twig-like hands, it held a small, gilded picture frame I had seen on the downstairs mantelpiece, a portrait of the smiling Ashworth family. It held this picture before the void where its face should be, and it wore the frozen, painted smile of Caleb's mother for its own. From its shifting, shadowy body, it put forth a long and blackened twig of an arm, and it tapped upon the door with a single, skeletal finger. Thump, thump, thump. I threw myself back from the door, a choked gasp escaping my lips. I clapped a hand to my mouth to keep the bile from rising. My mind could not hold the shape of what I had seen. This was no creature that had broken into the house. This was the house itself, a living, breathing parasite that wore the stolen keepsakes of the dead, or the soon-to-be dead, for its raiment. From the door, a new voice whispered, and the blood in me went to ice. "Noah, why are you hiding in there? Your mother is so worried about you." It was my own mother's voice, perfect, a flawless imitation, the same gentle, loving voice she used when I was a child and sick with fever, the call to supper from a life that I suddenly felt I would not see again. A tidal wave of homesickness and of pure, undiluted horror washed over me, for I wanted nothing more than to be home, and I was not. I was here. and the thing in the hall gave a low, dry chuckle that was the sound of dead leaves scuttling across a cold stone walk. It knew. It knew it had found the part of me that was soft, the part that was vulnerable. "Let me in, Noah," my mother's voice whispered, a sound of both love and of poison. "I've come to take you home." I fell back to the wall and slid to the floor, my legs no longer able to support me. I felt the hot flush of shame in my thighs where my body had betrayed my terror. I looked at the trembling shape on the bed, the empty soda bottle he had offered. It had not been a joke. It had not been a rule, but a kindness, a tool for survival, because he knew. He knew all of it. A slow, patient scraping began upon the door itself, the sound of a sharp claw being drawn again and again across the wood. All the while, it whispered my name in the voice of my mother, and it promised me an end to all this terror if I would but unlatch the door. The hours passed like years in that room, and the thing outside did not cease its siege. It spoke in the voices of my friends, my grandparents, people I knew and people I could not know, a gallery of stolen ghosts at the door. It offered warmth and food. It promised safety. It promised an end to the long, dark night. And all the while, it scraped and scraped at the wood with a maddening, relentless patience. The raw fear had burned away in me, leaving behind a hard and bitter anger. I was angry at the thing in the hall, angry at the people who had built for it a cage and called it a home, and most of all, I was angry at the boy who hid in his blankets and would not speak. More hours passed. The moon had moved across the sky. "Caleb," I said. My voice was a dry, ragged croak in my throat. "Caleb, wake up!" A shape stirred in the bed. He looked out from the pale fortress of his sheets, and his eyes were raw and red-rimmed with unshed tears. "Is it gone?" he whispered, his voice small. "No, it's not gone," I said, my voice hard. "I need to know what this is. Now, no more lies, Caleb. What is that thing?" He flinched from the sharp sound of my voice. He sat up in the bed and hugged his knees to his chest, his eyes fixed on the tormented door. "I don't know what it is," he mumbled. "We just call it the night feeder. It's always been here, as long as my family has." The story came out of him then, a broken, disjointed telling in the dark. His great-great-grandfather, a wealthy industrialist, had built this house upon unhallowed ground, land stolen from people who knew better. And from the very first night, there was a wrongness in the wood and in the walls. A bargain had been struck in that long-ago time, an unspoken covenant with the darkness that dwelled there. The Ashworth family would have the house, its status, and its grandeur by the light of day. But from 9 until the dawn, the house was given over to that other thing. "It gets lonely," Caleb whispered, a single tear cutting a clean path through the grime on his face. "It likes to play. It mimics people. It uses things it finds around the house to try and make a body for itself. The apron, the hat, the family portrait. But it's getting bolder," he said, his voice trembling so hard his teeth chattered. "It used to just make noise, thumps and scrapes. Now, it tries to get in. The rules were enough before. Stay in your room, don't look, don't listen. But now, it wants more." He finally met my eyes, and I saw in them a guilt as deep and as cold as a winter well. "It wants someone new." A cold, hard truth settled in my soul, and it wound the air from my lungs. The sudden first-time ever invite, the frantic, desperate fear in his parents' eyes, the heavy industrial steel bolt on the bedroom door. You brought me here for it?" I asked, the words like stones in my mouth. "No, I didn't want to." The boy's voice finally broke, and a sob tore from his chest. "My parents, they said it was getting too strong, that it wouldn't be satisfied with just listening to them anymore. They said if it had someone new, someone not from the family, maybe it would be satisfied. Maybe it would sleep for a while. Maybe it would leave us alone." He had led me here as a lamb to the altar. His parents had not gone out. They were in this house, in their own locked and bolted room, and they were listening. They were praying that the beast in the hall would choose me. And in that moment of terrible revelation, the scraping stopped. The whispers died. The house fell into a quiet so profound, so absolute, it was like the earth had stopped its turning on its axis. "What's happening?" I breathed, my heart seizing in my chest. Caleb's eyes grew wide with a new, more profound terror. From the floor below, a new sound came. The sound of heavy feet on the stairs, no dragging, no scraping, a confident footfall, and the slow, methodical dragging of a dead weight behind it. Thump, drag, thump, drag. It was coming up. It was not trying to trick us anymore. The game was done. The footsteps ceased directly outside our door. The silence held for a count of 3 heartbeats. Then a crack like a bolt of thunder sounded as a great and terrible force struck the door. The wood splintered, and the deadbolt shrieked in its metal housing. Crack! A web of long, deep breaks spidered out from the lock. A fine dust of ruined wood fell to the floor like snow. "It's never done this before," Caleb whimpered, a high, thin sound of utter despair. He crawled away from the bed, crab-walking toward the dark corner of the room. "It's never tried to break the door down." Crack, bang! The deadbolt was torn from the doorframe like a rotten tooth from a jaw. The door swung slowly inward on its protesting hinges with a sad and final groan. And in the suffocating blackness of the hall, I saw it. The void was gone. It had filled itself. Its body was a terrible, impossible congress of things stolen from the house, splintered floorboards for shins and rusted weeping pipes for arms. Its torso was a twisted, broken cage of stair banisters, and within that cage I saw my own duffel bag, and it pulsed with a faint, dark light, like some grotesque and foreign heart. Its head was the grandfather clock from the hall. It leaned upon a neck of twisted wood and wires, and the brass pendulum swung behind the shattered glass face like a wild and frantic eye. From the clock, a voice came. Not one voice, but all of them. A discordant, demonic chorus of every voice it had ever stolen, speaking as one. Time is up. The thing assembled from the house's bones stepped into the room. Its coming was a grinding of mismatched parts, a clicking and groaning of old wood and rusted metal, and the air filled with the smell of sawdust and the deep, rich earth of an open grave. Caleb cried out, a sound of pure animal terror that was lost in the cacophony of the thing's advance. A hot and primal fear seized me, not of a predator, but of a thing that was fundamentally wrong in the world, an affront to nature. My hand found a glass sports trophy on Caleb's desk. I took it up and I threw it with all the strength that I had. It struck the face of the grandfather clock and the glass shattered in a spray of bright glittering shards. The thing reeled back. It made a sound like all the clocks in the world striking some final and calamitous hour at once, a clangorous, overlapping chime of doom. It gave us a moment. A single, precious moment. "The window!" I screamed. I grabbed Caleb by his arm and dragged him, for he was a thing of stone and fear. My fingers were slick with sweat and they slipped and scrabbled on the old window latch. It would not give. It had been painted into its frame decades ago, sealed shut. The thing righted itself. The broken glass of its face caught the moonlight in 1,000 crazed, glittering points of light. It came for us, its arm of rusted pipe raised up to strike. "The bed! Help me with the bed!" I yelled. Adrenaline found him at last, and he moved. We set our shoulders to the heavy oak bedstead and heaved, turning it onto its side. We made of it a poor and flimsy barricade between us and the monster. The creature stumbled into the mattress, and its feet, made of broken chair legs and other things, became tangled in the sheets and blankets. It roared, a sound of grinding metal and splintering wood, and it began to tear the bed apart with its hands, ripping the guts of it out onto the floor. We were trapped in the corner of the room with the unyielding window at our backs. "The sun!" Caleb gasped, his eyes wild and wide. "It's the only thing. It has to be back inside the walls before the sun comes up." I risked a glance out into the night, and the sky was a deep and starless, impenetrable black. We did not have hours. We barely had minutes. The creature tore itself free of the ruined bed. It came on, slow now, deliberate, for it knew that we were its own. It raised a hand made of silverware stolen from the kitchen, the forks and the spoons and knives bound together with wire to make a shining and terrible claw. And then I saw it, a glint of metal tucked behind his television. It was a long, heavy, high-powered flashlight. A last and desperate thought came to me, a sliver of hope in the crushing dark. I lunged, scrambling over a pile of clothes, and took up the cold metal of the flashlight. The thing was upon me. I could smell the dust of its body, and I saw my own terrified face reflected in the frantic arc of the swinging brass pendulum in its broken face. My thumb found the switch, and I flicked it on. A great brilliant pillar of pure white light struck it full in its clock face head. It shrieked, a sound of pure electronic agony. The light did not burn it, but seemed to unmake it from itself. The spoons of its hand clattered to the floor, the wires snapping. A floorboard on its leg split down the middle and fell away. The light was a poison to the thing's very being, anathema to the darkness that gave it form. It shielded the ruin of its face with its pipe arm, and it stumbled back into the shadows by the door. And in that room began the longest, most terrifying watch of my life. I held the light like a holy sword, and the cone of its beam was the only thing that held the creature at bay. Caleb huddled behind me, crying out in soft whimpers whenever it scuttled and scraped at the edges of the room, testing the boundaries of its prison of light. We were keepers of a single, fragile light against a great and pressing dark, and the strength in my arm burned away to nothing. The batteries that fueled our only weapon would not last. I could feel the light growing weaker. The creature would lunge, and I would drive it back with the beam, and then we would wait, and listen to it breathing its dusty, dry breath in the shadows. The hours passed this way in a grueling, terrifying stalemate between the light and the dark. The beam of the light began to fail. It flickered once, twice. "It's dying," I gasped, my arm shaking uncontrollably. "Just a little longer," Caleb urged, his eyes fixed desperately upon the window. "Just a little longer, Noah, please." The creature knew. It gathered itself in the dark as the beam dimmed to a sad, pathetic yellow glow, and with a final, triumphant, grinding roar, it charged. In that very same moment, a pale, thin gray line was drawn upon the black horizon. It was the first faint hint of dawn. The thing struck me like a freight train, and the flashlight was knocked from my hand, skittering across the floor. I was on my back, and the monster stood over me. Its clock face bent low, and for a terrifying second I saw my own face reflected in the slow final arc of the swinging pendulum. Then a single pure golden ray of the morning sun pierced the window and touched the creature's back. It froze. A profound, absolute stillness came over it. Then it began to come apart. The clock head crumbled to a fine gray dust. The rusted pipe arms fell from its shoulders and clattered onto the floorboards. The banisters of its chest unwound and fell into a heap. The stolen silverware, the splintered wood, and my own duffel bag all collapsed into a simple, mundane pile of refuse. In moments, all that was left on the floor was this pile of debris and a thin, uniform layer of gray dust that smelled of the grave. The sun streamed through the window, warm and golden, and filled the ruined room with light. I lay upon the floor and gasped for breath, my lungs burning. Caleb wept against the far wall, a terrible, ragged sound of relief and of terror and of guilt. We had lived. There were footsteps in the hall, not of a monster, but of a man and a woman. The door to his parents' room creaked open. A moment later, Mr. and Mrs. Ashworth stood in our doorway. They did not look at the ruin of the room, nor at the pathetic pile of debris on the floor where the creature had been. They did not look at their weeping, traumatized son. They looked at me. And I saw on their faces not relief, not joy, not any gladness that their son and his friend had survived the night. I saw only a deep, cold, and bottomless disappointment. The horror was not ended. In their eyes, I saw the real horror of Greywood House. The plan had failed. The sacrifice had not been made. The night feeder would be hungry again when the sun fell. I wasn't saved that night. I was just the one who got away. And for that, I knew they would never, ever forgive me.